Patterson from Field Partner. I'm a lifelong cross-cultural missions worker and now trainer. And I'd like to welcome you today to the next in our series of interviews, which we're filming for the Field Partner community. It's such a privilege for me to conduct these interviews because I get to talk to some wonderful people, hear some amazing stories of God's faithfulness amidst the joys and challenges of cross-cultural life. And then I get to share these with you. We aim to interview a wide range of people who are now or have been on such a journey, releasing them regularly on our website and on the YouTube channel. You can see all these we have released so far if you go to the link below. Field Partner is a growing community, and our aim is to serve those in missions worldwide with suitable resources and for training and support. Our platform offers courses, coaching, and connection, as well as being a portal to all sorts of relevant resources on other sites too. We welcome you to check us out, sign up for our newsletter, and like us on Facebook to put the word out to others about what we offer. The links you need to do that are below. And if you'd like to find out more about our training or coaching, please feel free to email us at ask@fieldpartner.org. So it's my joy today to introduce my latest guest, Jennifer Bishop. Jen and I discovered when we first met that we have something unusual in common. We both were born in Burundi, a tiny little country in the middle of Africa. Both Jen's parents and mine worked as missionaries in the same agency there. They were from different generations, but they knew each other. Jen herself has had quite a mix of cultural experiences, which she will no doubt talk about. Ross and I met her in 2017 when we flew to Burundi for Ross to be the plenary speaker at a missions congress in Bujumbura. And Jen came from Australia to represent her parents because they were unable to go. Since then, she's become a dear friend and advisor, a huge resource and help to us in Field Partner, for which we're very grateful. So thank you, Jen, so much for agreeing to be interviewed. Why don't we start with your origins in Burundi? How did that come about and what came next?
Sure. Okay. So my mum told me the story that I think she was a teenager in her Sunday school or youth group, whatever that was back then. I think it was some kind of youth leadership program. A woman called Meg Gilbo came and spoke and shared about Burundi and this call for people to go to Africa. And she pretty much decided then, about the age of 14, that she would be going as a missionary. And so she went through teacher training and taught in London, and then went to missionary training, learned French, and went to Africa. In her missionary training, she was engaged to a British guy, but called it off and felt like, oh, well, I'm off to Africa. Maybe I'll never get married. And she landed there in her mid to late 20s and was a school teacher in a tiny, tiny little village called Kibuye up in the hills. And there she met, about a year into her time there, an Australian engineer came, and he was working with Tearfund doing a hydro project. So he'd come quite independently just to use his engineering skills. And he started to like her, but she was a little bit unsure since she'd been through a broken engagement that she really wanted something with him. And I think he got the picture. So he started to show interest in another woman I think she was a nurse. And suddenly I think it catalyzed my mother to realize that she actually really liked him and she didn't want him to like someone else. So being in the middle of Africa, there wasn't a lot of, other options. So they dated and got to know each other in a really lovely kind of context of sharing their mission kind of endeavors. And when they got married in Burundi, and my grandparents went out to have a wedding with them there in Africa. And my dad then moved from Tearfund to work with the same mission organization and extend his project out. So yeah, they were missionaries, I guess, kind of what do you call it? Like professional missionaries. So they had a job. My mum was a teacher. My dad was an engineer, but working with the mission that was supporting the church work there. And they had 3 kids while they were in Africa, 2 on furlough back in the UK. And I was born in Burundi. Okay. And my older sister was born under very kind of difficult circumstances, and they almost lost her. And they were so glad that they'd gone to England to have their first baby. And then I was the second baby, and my grandparents were understandably quite worried about my mother then having a baby in the middle of Africa without a lot of medical care, particularly because my older sister had been so troubled as it, like the birth had been so difficult. So apparently back then it's like a telegram coming from Burundi, a telegram arrived. Apparently my grandmother in the UK was shaking as she opened it up, just imagining that she was learning that her daughter had died in childbirth or something. But yeah, I was born just quite quickly at midnight in the middle of Africa in a little hospital, and I spent 6 years there. So I was about 6 when mum and dad decided to leave Burundi. They'd been there 10 years by that time. Yeah.
Right. I should point out that Meg Gilbo, who was the cause of your mother's call, is actually my big sister. So, and actually my parents were also married in Burundi. It was the very first Western couple to be married in that country. So yeah, that's another area of commonality which I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were 6 when you went back. You went first of all to the UK, is that right? And then to Australia?
Yeah, we went to the UK for 6 months. I think that was just a wrap up period. My father went back to Burundi just to tie up a few things. They pretty much decided that sending us to boarding school was something they didn't want to do because the better boarding schools were over in Kenya or Tanzania. And there was a little bit of political unrest at the time in Burundi. So the idea of us getting stranded at boarding school and not being able to come home, being very little children, they decided we should go. So we went to the UK and we were all put in school for about 6 months. And that was really nice. So we got a white Christmas and we got time with grandparents, and it was real. My memories of that time are so strong, and I think it's because it was so different. The life was so different, wearing wintry clothes and being indoors, and the trees and everything, and the weather and the feeling. Everything was so different. The smells and everything was so different. But they always had a plan to go to Australia, where my father's family are. So I guess they had to make a choice to stay in the UK or go to Australia, and they chose to go to Australia. So by the time we got to Australia, I had my 6th birthday in the UK. So I was then 6 when we went to Australia. Yeah.
Right. So that would actually give you what they call the third culture kid identity. Do you resonate with that? Do you feel that it fits you, or were you so young it didn't really make much difference?
It's quite interesting to reflect on. I definitely remember many years of wishing to go back to Burundi, and we would all say to each other, "Oh, I wish we could go back. Wouldn't it be amazing?" Because our memories were so happy there and our childhood was so free and things. And mum and dad would just say, if you went back, you'd find it very different. It would be different to your memories, as well as the fact that it had gone through some civil war, and so a lot of things would be different. But I think we definitely grieved that transition. You grieve your friends and you grieve the lifestyle that you've had. And I mean, we were young enough to kind of fit quite quickly into a new system, but I always grew up with a sense of my belonging was kind of elsewhere in a way, so that I'd come from abroad and my identity was abroad. And so I lived all my primary and high school years just wanting to go abroad in different capacities. I always wanted to travel and live abroad, whereas I found that quite different to some of my peers who just lived and grown up in the one town in Australia, and that was all they knew, and they really just wanted to stay in Australia, and I found that quite strange.
So, but you did do that then. You spent some time in West Africa, you spent some time in Korea. So when were those different experiences?
Yeah. So as I said, I was quite desperate to go abroad. So my first opportunity after university, I just went backpacking. And part of that, I went for 3 months to stay with some missionary friends in Africa, but they were in West Africa, in Guinea and Conakry. And I guess I was trialing out, was missions for me? I wasn't sure if I wanted to go as a full-time missionary, if that was my calling, so to speak. So they were missionaries we knew from Australia. They were from Africa, and it was quite a different experience because it was Muslim Africa, it was West Africa, it was French speaking, similar to Burundi, but my French wasn't very good. So it was, yeah, just a really different experience. And I think I was quite hardy to travel and adventure and camping and eating different food and all of those things. But probably the culture shock I experienced in those 3 months was more isolation and to be honest, boredom of living in a tiny little village with no stimulation. And I realized, oh, okay, this is culture shock. I'm experiencing culture shock. It was different to what I'd expected because I was ready for the culture shock of getting malaria or eating something strange or something like that, which I got, but I wasn't too fazed by, but it was the boredom that really bothered me. And so I realized, oh, okay, maybe that traditional mission is not the calling for me, but I still love travel and culture. So I kept exploring that. And I went to, because I trained as an English teacher. I trained in literature and English at university. I love writing and things. So I then followed a friend who was teaching English in South Korea, and I went and taught English there for 2 years and taught first year young children in what they call a hogwan, which is a tutorial academy where they'd learn English. And then in my second year, I taught adults, and I taught adults academic and business English more in the city center in a similar institute. And that was a great experience, but again, a totally different culture and totally different
Did you have
lifestyle.
any orientation or training of any kind to do that?
No, because that one I went totally in a secular capacity as an English teacher. I didn't go in any kind of church capacity. And really, the only qualification was I needed a degree of any kind, and I needed so they got my visa, paid for my accommodation, paid for my flight and everything, and I pretty much just turned up. So there was a period of time where my peer teachers helped orient me to living in Korea, so showed me where to go and how to, what things were what price and how to kind of basic Korean words and things. But a lot of it was just learned on the go. It was a kind of a unique experience because I was very immersed in the culture of other expats. So other English, Australian, New Zealand, Canadian, American teachers. So we very much kind of hung out with each other and had our little bubble and kind of coped together that way. Yeah.
Common thing, the phenomenon that happens.
Yeah.
Expat communities. But then you went back to Australia after that and just settled into life there, or what other intercultural experiences did you have?
Yeah, so I had a bit of a broken heart during that time in Korea, dated someone and it didn't work out. And so I guess that again contributed to culture shock and a desire to go home and be close to family. So I went home, and even though I loved culture and I loved travel and I wanted to live internationally, I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I think I'll stay home for a while and I'll try and settle in Australia. And the way I could cope with that was to be as immersed as possible with people of other cultures in Australia. So I joined a church that was quite a large kind of multicultural church in Brisbane. And I started to volunteer within their, what they call a cultural ministry. So they had a lot of international students and kind of ethnic groups amongst Indigenous Australians, South Asians, South and Central Americans. Also, there was quite a large Filipino community, and then a lot of Africans who were coming as refugees. So I started to kind of volunteer in that community, and I was using my English teaching capacity to do a free English conversation class. And that kind of went from international students into quite a large refugee ministry, which was really, really amazing. I really enjoyed it because there was a lot of Iranian refugees coming into Australia at that time, a lot of boatloads of people just washing up on the shore. And so there was a huge kind of need for helping refugees in the community and helping them with English and things. So we did a lot at that time. Yeah. Yeah.
So a previous interviewee talked about the world on our doorstep, which is really what you're describing.
Yeah.
It's coming to Western countries in search of work or in search of sanctuary of some kind. And so how do you think the Western world, the Western church can reach out to people? What do we need to do to
Yeah.
prepare ourselves?
Yeah.
And what are the hindrances?
I mean, it's a huge question, and I think it's an amazing opportunity. And I think living in London, you definitely see and feel the multiculturalness of London. Everywhere you go, there's people of all different kind of colours and religious backgrounds. And I think this is a massive opportunity. At that time in Australia, there was quite a lot of resistance from the kind of the white Australians to waves of immigrants, and kind of outspokenness about, oh, there's a mosque being built in our community, and this is a huge affront to our culture and to our Christianity and things. And to me at the time, I found that so difficult to listen to, because in my mind, it was like, we can't go to many of these cultures, and we could never speak about Christianity to people in their country openly. And yet they're coming in droves into our community. This is an amazing opportunity, not a threat. Like, why do we see it as a threat? And unless we're so weak that the walls of our Christianity just crumble under someone building a mosque in our community, rather than seeing that as an opportunity for us to reach people that we would otherwise not be able to reach. So yeah, I've found some of that kind of dialogue quite difficult, but rather than say combat it with kind of arguments, just kind of get in there and just start helping people, start visiting families, talking to people, around hospitality and food and things. And fortunately, because my parents, ever since going back to Australia, they were really involved in cultural ministry in their church and missions and mission support. And they were doing very similar things, having refugees in their home and having, community groups to kind of reach out to migrants in the community. So I felt like there was a support network around me of people who had a similar mindset. But at the same time, you're always dealing with the people who just don't like change, they feel a kind of fear or a bit of xenophobia about people coming in. And I actually did a theology training in about 8 or 9 years ago now. And I remember really learning in my theology training, like a lot of the theology of the exile, where the Jews were commanded to be a blessing to the nations. And when they stopped being a blessing to the nations and they started to just copy and kind of blend in with the culture around them and adopt the kind of religious around them, that's when they were scattered. So they were either taken to Egypt, or they were taken into Babylon, and or they kind of became the diaspora. And it was almost like God forcing them to go and be a blessing somewhere else, and to kind of hold on to their identity and their culture, because where they were being blessed, they were not blessing the world. As in, when they were settled in their country, they were not blessed. They were not blessing the world. God would almost uproot them and send them and make them a blessing to the world. And so I think, like, really God's plan is that wherever we are meant to bless the world around us. And if we don't go to the world will come to us. And that's the way that God works constantly, all the time.
Right. So in terms of the hindrances that are in our hearts, what can we do to combat that? I think, would training help? Do you think it's still valid?
I see, definitely. Yeah. And I had to appreciate that for many people, it was, it wasn't just kind of a lack of care or something like that. Often it's just when you're encountering someone from not only from a different culture and a different language, but very different social and economic background. And often it's these things that are actually harder than kind of skin color and things, or perception. So it's really helping people kind of worlds come together. So I find just really basic things like hospitality and skill sharing, so helping people do a language exchange or just talk about their culture, is a really great one. But of course, giving people that kind of meta awareness, so kind of training about culture, training about other people's worldview and religion and beliefs, is really invaluable as well. I think one of the downsides of being from an English speaking background, where we are the kind of the global language, is a sense of we are normal and the rest of the world is different. And so helping people to understand actually the way we do things is just one way and it's not the way. And so even that self-analysis of the way I think and the way I prefer things and the way other people think and prefer things isn't wrong. It's just a different way. And so how can you actually learn from them as well as kind of help them understand your culture?
Right. So, well, despite being raised in Australia, you are half English. So what prompted the move to come over? You just mentioned that you're now living in London. What prompted the move to come over here? And do you feel that was a cross-cultural move, or is it more like coming to a second home?
It's not a really big cross-cultural move, although there are differences that are noticeable. So, I mean, the reason why I think professionally I'd kind of reached the end of what I was doing in Australia with my job and I wanted a change and I was looking around for a change. A friend in London had said, you know, there's plenty of work here. And I'd gone through another breakup. And so I was single and free to kind of move around and I wanted to move. And so I came to London for a kind of new opportunity in many, many ways. And it's been great. But as far as culture, I think what I mentioned before about noticing the multitude of ethnicities is a big one, particularly London. But also, I mean, there's just interesting things about the British people. So endearing things that I've learned to really love, but I found curious. So I think Australians are a little bit more blunt and British people are very, very, you learn that there's layers and there's a beautiful, lovely softness, but sometimes it's a very guarded and you can take time to get to know people and then realize that sometimes you're never actually going to know what people think because they'll actually keep their feelings quite concealed. And I mean, it's just very small, subtle things and a kind of a sense of social class here and the sense of the blue blood and the aristocracy and the kind of where you fit in a social pecking order. I'd say that doesn't exist so much in Australia. We certainly have wealthy and middle class and working class, but it's not quite the same stratification of society. Yeah, so it's just curious. I find Christians here a lot more left wing than in Australia. I find Australian Christians, in my experience, are quite conservative and right wing, a bit more like American Christians. Whereas here, people are very conscious of the environment and very conscious about refugees and very conscious about, ethics and justice, which is wonderful. And it's a bit more my leaning. So, yeah, it's just an observation, general observations.
So you're happy being here?
I'm really enjoying it. Yeah.
That's great. So you've been furloughed during COVID. You were anyway for a while. And during that time, you were very kind and said that you would consult with us and give us some time to benefit us from your expertise, which we're very grateful for. But at the same time, you were actually developing your own business. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've gone from English teaching and teaching refugees to doing theology and working for NGOs to more into using my English in a marketing capacity and really enjoying that. So when I met you guys in Burundi 3 years ago, I was really just starting to develop my marketing skills. And I came to London and worked in an NGO in a marketing capacity. And when I was furloughed for 3 months this year, from May to July, I actually used that time to really develop my consultancy. So now I'm fully self-employed and doing marketing consulting, which I'm loving. Yeah.
Great. So if anyone wanted to take advantage of your expertise, how would you get hold of you?
Yeah, so I mostly help coaches and consultants, so self-employed individuals, but also organizations like yourself, so people that are doing online training, people who are selling workshops or information products, digital products or training, and I just help with lead generation, so finding your client and getting them on board. So if anybody's interested in that, please, look me up at jenbishopconsulting.com and I'll be happy to do a free 30-minute consultation and give you some tips and advice.
And we would highly recommend her.
Great.
Well, anyway, thanks, Jen. Thanks so much for sharing. And I hope people will get in touch with you. And we certainly have benefited so much from all that you've helped us with. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking this interview as well today. Okay, so that's it for this interview. And we really would be glad if you'd go across to the Facebook site and like us there and listen to the other interviews, which you can find the links for, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye then. God bless.